Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me at one of Doctor Who's longest ever stories. The last time I did a marathon, I chronicled it over on the forum Gallifrey base, writing up my thoughts on each story as I went along. And like I said, while I finished that marathon, I only chronicled them on Gallifrey base up until David Tennant's first series because, Gallifrey base became a little bit of hard work and I had to take a step back. So don't let me down, YouTube. On that marathon, I did something crazy with this story. I had the house and the day to myself, and being acutely aware of how important it is to keep up the pace when it comes to the Daleks Master Plan, and to keep up the momentum in general when it comes to Season 3, given how many missing stories and reconstructions there are to get through, I seized both liberties and did something I'd never done before, and that was to sprint it. Yeah, I did the Daleks Master Plan in one sitting, and just by happenstance I happened to have the house and the day to myself when its turn came. This time I decided to do it again. It's a brilliant way of consuming this story if you can, for two reasons. Firstly, to have this behemoth behind me in one fell swoop felt like an achievement both times. Yeah, it's great, but it's long. And while there are still daunting stretches coming up, the Daleks Master Plan always kind of looms at you when you're doing a marathon and fast approaching it. And secondly, it's a very good story. Spending an afternoon and early evening following the Doctor, Stephen, Katarina and Sarah run from Daleks, outsmart the Meddling Monk and put a stop to the Guardian of the Solar System's evil schemes felt like watching an epic matinee movie, and in that regard it works really well. No wonder the Daleks Master Plan can seem insurmountable if it can take us days or weeks to finish it. It might seem crazy to attempt it all in one, but instead of those days or weeks drawing on, it's over within 5.5 hours, so paradoxically it can seem more manageable doing it this way. Someone once said in the marathon section of Gallifrey base, and it's always stuck with me, that this is pretty much 12 episodes of nicking a battery, and it kind of is, but I'll tell you what, it doesn't half do wonders with that relatively meagre pitch over those 5.5 hours. I think it's almost certainly the length of this story which daunts some of us, and I always forget that it's actually quite fun once I get started. And yeah, there's no denying 12 episodes is a silly amount, and there's really no reason for it to be that long. But I'm always quite surprised by how well it sustains 11 episodes plus one batshit crazy diversion, especially when you actually stack it up against some stories that struggle with 6. Heck, even some stories which struggle with 4. One of the things this story does quite well, thanks to its epic nature, is make the Doctor Who universe feel much, much bigger. The alliance we glimpsed in Mission to the Unknown with added Mavic Chen offers scope to the future and ground it in a society. Usually the TARDIS lands on one planet and we get a nice look into the species ruling it. Here we travel between planets in a colonised galaxy. The whole makeup of the future is set up quite nicely, I think. When Terry Nation isn't trying to be goofy, he can actually world build pretty well. Little references to the Venus-Mars game are really nice seasoning, but I also think that the introduction of Mavic Chen is handled very efficiently.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure that all throughout our system echo your thoughts.
Even you must agree, he's an impressive man.
Yes, it's nice to hear his speech again.
That is fantastic writing after Mavic Chen has just addressed the whole solar system. In fact, it's 9 minutes in before the TARDIS even lands on Kemble, and its sound is most welcome. Within it, Stephen is badly hurt, and the Doctor and Katarina must help him. Now, after being introduced to Katarina in the last episode of the previous story, here we see her shadowing the Doctor, and you know what? I quite like her, and the Doctor seems to as well. He was charming to himself about her after a certain interaction. And long before he meets Leela, here we kind of get a glimpse of the Professor Higgins, Eliza Doolittle dynamic in action, if it weren't so short-lived. Seeing everything through Katarina's eyes lends these first few episodes an additional quality. Yeah, not knowing what things are and how things work are kind of what Doctor Who companions do. Watch this, Doctor, but Doctor, watch that, etc, etc. But given the time period she's from, she doesn't know a lot of things even the viewer does. So that does kind of show up her rather tricky nature as a main character, but as she learns about stuff that's put in front of her in a way that's not necessarily usual when it comes to a Doctor Who companion, I do find myself warming to her, and that ultimately means her sacrifice in episode 4 does resonate on some level. Thinking that she was on her way to the beyond is an entirely plausible thought process given where she's from, when she's from, and what she's being presented with. It therefore explains her rash decision, and it knocks the Doctor and Stephen for 6 seconds, that is. After a lovely speech, the Doctor seems back to his normal self. He's just lost a companion for the very first time to death, that we know of, but then he is aware of how high the stakes currently are. And they do feel higher than we've had them before, thanks to the scope that this story has. And if we forget about the practical behind the scenes reasons for the sudden introduction and departure of Katarina, then her short-lived spell on the programme kind of makes sense, because this is a story that needs casualties, not just wants them. Nation isn't being funny this time. He wasn't being last time either. Oh, stop it, Chris. This brings me on to Katarina's also short-lived replacement, Sarah Kingdon. Jean Marsh is superb. From her striding into the story and ordering her men to aim for the head, to her electrifying argument with Stephen on Myra, where she admits that Brett was her brother. Incidentally, Stephen is much better at being angry than Ian was, to her eventual softening and redemption. Considering there is some inconsistency in tone between episodes, Jean Marsh portrays Sarah's journey very skillfully indeed. To be honest, the first 5 episodes roll along pacier than the first 5 episodes of a 6-part story do. There's something very steady and sure about it, that it never feels like it's really padding for time. Okay, so the diversion on Desperus may not be wholly necessary, but it's made to feel more germane and organic than the diversions to the Haunted House or the Empire State Building were in The Chase. By Coronas of the Sun, I think to myself, as I usually do, what was I worried about? And then I remember that I'm only just getting up to about halfway through, so why would pacing be an issue yet? And equally, it's not like this is some kind of like frustratingly knockabout piece of silliness. And then I remember what the next episode is.
It's poisonous.
Most of us know just how balmy this interlude is, and it is just that, it's a balmy interlude. Now, taken as an episode of the Daleks Master Plan, it definitely brings the score down quite a bit. As well-meaning as it is, I can't ignore it as quite a considerable drag factor. But I feel it best to watch it and then just forget it, sort of as intended. So I do. It has no impact on the story, so it will have no impact on the score. It's an anomaly. It's like Mission to the Unknown, only less significant. And when I say it's like Mission to the Unknown, I mean it works better as an episode on its own between stories. Only marginally in this case, it barely works at all, except because it comes in the middle of one story, its madness is magnified. There are some references to Daleks, presumably for those who watched every week and were damn well not going to miss it on Christmas Day, but really it's just a bit of madness made for the Christmas crowd. Except that I myself don't find it fun or funny bonkers. I mean, some nice moments aside, and there are some nice moments, the recognising the actor from The Crusade I really like, and it also makes some internal sense that Sarah equates the police station with the Doctor's TARDIS and concludes that they've landed on his home planet. When we return to the story proper, there still feels like something of a hangover from the Feast of Stephen as the TARDIS lands during a cricket match. That said, the rather bored commentators do elevate this into something a little bit more entertaining than we saw in the Feast of Stephen. And Dennis Spooner's decision to bring back the Meddling Monk is a very good one. The story is 8 episodes deep by this point, and there has to be something to re-energise it. His standoff with the Doctor is well done, and the first reappearance of a singular enemy, and one of the Doctor's own people to boot, helps galvanise Doctor Who's continuity further. It can start referring back to itself now, and yeah, sure, it may go a little bit overboard with that in the future, but here, there's almost a little frisson as it realises it can, and I do quite enjoy watching the show experimenting with it in its early years. But as much fun as the Monk is, and I do welcome his presence, this drifting slightly from the main plot is a rather big indicator that maybe it's running out of steam. But the Doctor, Stephen and Sarah are a great combination, and having enjoyed Jean Marsh's integration so far, I'm having a great time in their company. And the Daleks' pursuit of them is way more palatable this time round than it was in The Chase, mainly because it's played straight, or straighter, and the Daleks are actually made to feel more menacing as foes. And the scope of this one being so much larger and epic might make them feel more menacing here than in any of their previous appearances. It's also nice to see them in ancient Egypt. For me, I think the Daleks' USP is their fantastic design, and that gives them a kind of incongruity, so to put them next to the pyramids makes for a really wonderful image. And if you add in an additional TARDIS, well, I'm having a blast with the Egyptian episodes in this story. They feel almost like a mini historical. It's almost as if the Daleks Master Plan feels like a season of Doctor Who all by itself, and it's managing to hit the beats of one, but in miniature. And the Monk is a great adversary for Hartnell's Doctor. It's a very important distinction that he works for the Daleks purely to save his own life rather than out of actual evil. This is in keeping with his prior appearance as a nuisance rather than as a true villain. And he's so well realised, and Peter Butterworth is such a fun presence, that it's a real shame we didn't see him again. Not least because he brings out a great performance from Hartnell both times they face off against each other. And that's another reason why I can't be too hard on this story, because William Hartnell is breathtakingly good in it. I think there's always been a level of subterfuge in his performance, in that while he's playing the Doctor in a show called Doctor Who and displays very compassionate and heroic qualities, he does so almost in a very modest way. But here he is undoubtedly a leading man. Yeah, sure, he's been in control of the show for a while now, except that here, those heroic qualities, they're almost posturing through and through, and it's a joy to watch. He starts the story by correcting Katarina on whether or not he's a god or a lord, and shrugs off Brett Vian's remarks that he's a very brave man with
Rubbish, my boy. I'm only doing what has to be done.
Then he impersonates Zephon and proceeds with the biggest balls imaginable to waltz into a secret meeting of an alliance of alien miscreants chaired by the Daleks and nick their gear before running for his escape on a stolen spaceship in the nick of time. Time-wise, this would have been Ian's job, except he's not around anymore. Stephen is, though, so why wasn't it given to Stephen to do? Well, I think the answer in part is that Hartnell now truly, utterly and magnificently owns the show. He always has, of course, like I said, but I think here is where that subterfuge that I said was part of his performance up to this point is kind of like chipped away a little bit. This is almost like his big reveal. This is him showing us in no uncertain terms that he now owns the show. He is absolutely wonderful. The Doctor is now acting totally outside of self-interest. His first reaction when he sees the Daleks isn't to run away, it's to galvanise and fight them. He's even prepared to potentially sacrifice the TARDIS to stop the Daleks by installing the Monk's directional unit. There is, however, one thing which might threaten to steal the whole show from under William Hartnell, and that is Kevin Stoney as Mavic Chen. First off, it's nice that handwriting is still a thing in the year 4000 and we don't totally succumb to typing everything. Unless we do, and Mavic Chen is just trying to master the ancient art of handwriting and he's just practicing. Which might explain his sort of like bizarre scribbling. Maybe he's just writing his name lots and lots, or seeing what it looks like with the Daleks' surname. Mavic and the Daleks forever, if destroyed ever true. Stoney's performance is lovely to watch. We know the Daleks, he doesn't. Knowing he's so out of his depth makes for quite a tense plotline, and when he properly goes bananas, the first glimpse of which is when he slaps a Dalek in the eye stalk, it is the best depiction of a villain's insanity the show has done yet. After trying to shoot the Dalek Supreme, he proceeds to run off babbling that he's immortal, and I so wish I could see it because it sounds amazing. If only the destruction of time were returned to us. The thing about that episode is that it would be a fantastic climax to a 6-episode story where nobody's had a chance to get bored of anything. It would be an amazing climax to an 8-part story, but here's the thing, even though this has been a story of 12 episodes and it has gone on for a long time, the destruction of time is a more than satisfying payoff. This episode is so good that the 11 episodes building up to it have not felt like filler. It has been worth it for this. Sarah's demise is utterly horrifying, and it's hard to believe that this occurs in the same story that gave us the Feast of Stephen. In the closing moments, Peter Purvis, who I haven't really spoken about all that much since he jumped aboard, but mainly that's because I've been waiting for the next story to have the opportunity to do so at more length. Anyway, here he is just great, mourning the dead and thankfully remembering to name check Katarina. 102 episodes in, and the longest story for quite a good while is now out of the way. Although, having been able to sprint through this in one sitting twice now, I don't think I ever need to consider it out of the way. I always kind of dread it to some degree, mainly because of its length and that it's 75% missing, but devoting one afternoon and watching it and devouring it all in one go weirdly actually makes it a more rewarding experience. And now, after it all, I think kind of it's time for a light-hearted romp, right? Right? I think I may actually have to go for a Dalek comic beat when they're confronted by the laboratory mice.
There are small white creatures inside. They may be hostile.
Nah, that'd be silly. I think the highlight in this story is the Doctor's outright proactivity, the culmination and crowning glory of which is him racing along with the Time Destructor in the final episode. Easily his most heroic demonstration yet. Yeah, it's the Feast of Stephen, I'm afraid. This story does a hell of a lot and manages to pull it off successfully. It writes out a companion, introduces the replacement, and then writes that one out too. And both of those departures are deaths. 2 companions die in this story, and Stephen's travels with the Doctor are becoming increasingly traumatic. It brings back not just the Daleks but also the Monk, and both get a lot of good stuff to do. The Daleks are recalibrated following their misstep, in my opinion, in the chase, and the Monk is allowed to do what he does best. And it widens out the Doctor Who universe and introduces us to a top-tier one-off villain in Mavic Chen. Obviously, it's a little bit problematic how they've made up Kevin Stoney, and those later readings of him actually being blue are lovely to cling on to until you actually see the behind-the-scenes colour photographs. But Kevin Stoney, luckily, is back later on as another top-tier one-off villain without those unfortunate trappings. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this marathon within a marathon, then you know how YouTube works. Please give it a thumbs up. I watched the Daleks Master Plan that's mostly missing in one sitting. Deserves a little thumbs up, surely? Anyway, it really helps enormously. And what do you think of this one? Is it one of Doctor Who's crowning glories, or is it an overlong, overstuffed mess of missing episodes? Is it Doctor Who at its most epic, or is it Doctor Who at its most self-indulgent? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for a Doctor Who story like no other. And if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll meet you back in Paris. A bientôt, Huguenot. Sorry.